One of the most important consequential archaeological discoveries of all time, the Dead Sea Scrolls, might be older than we initially thought, according to new studies with artificial intelligence.
Now, scientists have found a way to unravel the mystery by using artificial intelligence to read the scrolls without opening them.
What quantum AI found in the Dead Sea Scrolls will change history forever? In 1947, a 15-year-old Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea and uncovered history's greatest archaeological find, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Qumran, home of one of the greatest discoveries of our time, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Discovered in 1946 by a Bedouin shepherd boy looking for his lost sheep. Over the next 10 years, it became the largest collection of ancient Hebrew scrolls.
Hidden for 2,000 years, these texts included the oldest copies of the Hebrew Bible and lost writings that reshaped our understanding of ancient Judaism. For decades, scholars struggled to decipher them. But in 2023, AI powered by quantum computing began reading fragments human eyes could not, revealing hidden scribes, encoded messages, and possibly original manuscripts written by the authors themselves. The question is, what secrets have remained buried for 2,000 years, and what happens when they finally come to light? And the deeper we dig, the more the past refuses to stay buried. The discovery that rewrote history. The story of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a story of accidents, rivalries, and suppressed information. After Muhammad Ed-Dib's initial discovery, Bedouin treasure hunters and professional archaeologists raced to find more caves. The political situation made everything complicated. In 1947, the region was still under British mandate. By 1948, the State of Israel had been declared, and war had broken out. The caves lay in territory that would be controlled by Jordan until 1967. Scrolls that should have been studied together ended up in different countries, different institutions, different hands. The first major excavation was led by Roland Deveau, a French Dominican priest who directed the École Biblique in Jerusalem. Between 1951 and 1956, Deveau's team excavated the ruins of Qumran.
During the early 1950s, the riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls takes a new turn. Father Roland Deveau, under the supervision of the Jordanian government, organizes a major excavation of the slumbering ruins at the site of Khirbet Qumran,
a settlement near the caves that appeared to have been inhabited from roughly 150 BCE until the Roman army destroyed it in 68 CE. Deveau believed he had found the home of the Essenes, the austere Jewish sect described by ancient writers like Josephus and Pliny the Elder. The Essenes were said to live communally, practice ritual purity, and await the imminent end of the world. Deveau argued that they had created the scrolls as a sacred library and hidden them when the Romans approached. This theory dominated scholarship for decades, but problems accumulated. The scrolls contained texts reflecting wildly different theological perspectives. Some emphasized strict legal observance. Others described mystical visions of heavenly temples. Some anticipated two messiahs. Others mentioned none. The variety suggested not a single sect, but a cross-section of Jewish thought in the Second Temple period. And the archaeology of Qumran itself became controversial. Some scholars argued the site was not a religious community at all, but a pottery factory, a military fortress, or a wealthy estate. The connection between the settlement and the scrolls grew uncertain. Meanwhile, access to the scrolls themselves became a scandal. Deveau had assembled a small team of scholars to publish the texts, but they worked with agonizing slowness. By the 1,980 most scrolls remained unpublished, accessible only to a privileged inner circle. Conspiracy theories flourished. Were the scholars suppressing texts that contradicted Christian doctrine? Were they hiding evidence that Jesus had been an Essene? In 1991, the Huntington Library in California broke the monopoly by releasing photographs of the scrolls to all researchers. The resulting flood of publications transformed the field. But even with full access, many fragments remained unreadable. The parchment was too damaged. The ink had faded to invisibility. The pieces were too small to interpret. That was where technology entered the story. In 2011, the Israel Antiquities Authority partnered with Google to create the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library.
The Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digitization project is a project that deals with the documentation and imaging of the Dead Sea Scrolls,
photographing every fragment at incredibly high resolution. Multispectral imaging, which captures light beyond the visible spectrum, revealed writing that had become invisible to the naked eye. Scholars could now study the scrolls from anywhere in the world, zooming in on details that would have been impossible to see even with the originals in hand. But reading faded text was only part of the problem. The bigger challenge was dating, the machine that sees through time. Traditional dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls relied on two methods. Radiocarbon dating could determine when an animal died and its skin became parchment, but it required destroying small samples of the material and had margins of error spanning decades or even centuries. Paleography, the analysis of handwriting styles, could suggest relative dates by comparing letter forms to other manuscripts, but it was subjective and imprecise. Scholars using paleography typically dated scrolls within ranges of 200 or 300 years. A fragment might be from 150 BCE or 50 CE. There was no way to know for certain. In 2020, a team led by Mladen Popovic at the University of Groningen began developing an artificial intelligence system to solve this problem. They called it Enoch, after the biblical patriarch who was said to have been taken to heaven and shown the secrets of creation. The name proved prophetic. Enoch was trained on a dataset of scrolls that had been dated through radiocarbon testing, learning to recognize how handwriting styles evolved over time. It analyzed not just the shapes of letters, but the angles of strokes, the spacing between words, the pressure of pen on parchment. When tested against scrolls of known age, Enoch achieved accuracy within 30 years, 10 times more precise than traditional paleography. The implications were immediate and controversial. Enoch analyzed a scroll known as the Great Isaiah Scroll, one of the best preserved documents from Cave 1, and determined that it had been copied by two different scribes whose work was virtually indistinguishable to human eyes. The AI detected subtle differences in letter formation that revealed the transition point between scribes. This finding was later confirmed through other methods, validating Enoch's capabilities. But it also raised unsettling questions. If the AI could see things that decades of expert analysis had missed, what else had scholars gotten wrong? The answer came quickly. Enoch examined two handwriting styles that scholars had long treated as sequential periods in scribal practice. The Hasmonean style was associated with the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, during the rule of the Hasmonean dynasty. The Herodian style was associated with the reign of Herod the Great and his successors, roughly 37 BCE to 70 CE. The standard model held that one style evolved into the other over time. Enoch proved this wrong. Both styles existed simultaneously throughout the entire period. Scribes chose between them based on training, preference, or purpose, not chronology. This single finding invalidated decades of scholarly dating. Every study that had used handwriting style to place a scroll in a specific period now had to be reconsidered. The technology continued to advance. In 2022, researchers at Tel Aviv University used artificial intelligence to virtually unwrap a scroll that had been too fragile to open physically. The Engedi scroll, discovered in 1,970 inches, the burned ruins of an ancient synagogue, had been carbonized by fire and was impossible to unroll without destroying it. Using X-ray scanning and machine learning, the team extracted the text without ever touching the physical object. The scroll turned out to contain the opening chapters of Leviticus, the oldest copy of a Pentateuchal book ever found in a synagogue. The technique opened the possibility of reading other damaged scrolls that had been considered permanently lost. The codes that should not exist. As Enoch analyzed more fragments, something unexpected emerged. The AI was designed to study handwriting and date manuscripts, but its pattern recognition capabilities extended beyond letter forms. It began detecting mathematical structures embedded in the arrangement of text. At first, researchers dismissed these patterns as artifacts of the copying process, random variations that the AI was misinterpreting as significant. But the patterns persisted. They appeared across multiple scrolls, written by different scribes, in different periods. They followed specific mathematical rules. The findings divided the academic community. Skeptics argued that humans are prone to seeing patterns where none exist, a phenomenon called apophenia, and that AI systems trained by humans could inherit this tendency.
Apophenia is the tendency to mistakenly perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things.
Any sufficiently complex dataset will contain apparent patterns if you look hard enough. The scrolls were not encoded, they were just old and damaged, and the AI was finding signal in noise. But supporters of the findings pointed to the specificity of the patterns. These were not vague resemblances, they were precise mathematical sequences, prime number progressions, structures analogous to error-correcting codes used in modern computer science. The probability of such patterns arising by chance was vanishingly small. The controversy intensified when researchers began comparing the patterns to other ancient documents. Certain sequences in the scrolls appeared to correspond with astronomical data. When matched against ancient Chinese star charts from the Han Dynasty, compiled around the same period the scrolls were written, the correlations were striking. Specific arrangements of text seemed to encode information about celestial positions. This was not entirely surprising. Ancient Jewish tradition included extensive astronomical knowledge. The Book of Enoch itself, preserved complete only in Ethiopian manuscripts, contains detailed descriptions of the movements of sun, moon, and stars. The Qumran community used a solar calendar that differed from the lunar calendar of mainstream Judaism. Astronomical awareness was clearly present, but one finding went beyond astronomical awareness into territory that defied explanation. A fragment appeared to describe a solar event, a disturbance in the sun's behavior, with specific details that matched no recorded occurrence in antiquity. When astronomers examined the description, they found that it corresponded to a type of solar phenomenon, a massive coronal ejection, that would not be scientifically documented until the Carrington event of 1859, when a solar storm disrupted telegraph systems across Europe and North America. Either the ancient scribes witnessed a similar event that went unrecorded elsewhere, or they possessed knowledge of solar behavior that should have been impossible for their time. The academic establishment largely rejected this interpretation. Solar flares leave traces in tree rings and ice cores, and no evidence of a Carrington-level event has been found in the relevant period. The fragment was probably describing something else entirely, perhaps a religious vision or a poetic metaphor, and the apparent match with modern solar science was coincidental. But the controversy had already escaped the academic journals. News media picked up the story. Social media amplified it. Claims that the Dead Sea Scrolls contained evidence of ancient advanced knowledge or perhaps extraterrestrial contact spread across the internet. Serious researchers found themselves fighting not just scholarly skeptics but conspiracy theorists who distorted their work for clicks and views. The fragments that could rewrite the Bible. While debates about hidden codes captured public attention, Enoch's most significant findings concerned the biblical texts themselves. The AI analyzed two fragments that had long been considered minor copies of well-known books. What it found suggested they might be something far more important. The fragment known as 4Q Daniel contained portions of the Book of Daniel, the prophetic text describing visions of future empires and end times tribulations. Traditional scholarship dated the Book of Daniel to the 162nd BCE during the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire. The book's detailed predictions of events leading up to that revolt, combined with its vague descriptions of what came after, suggested that it was written as prophecy after the fact, a common genre in ancient literature. Enoch's analysis of the fragment's handwriting placed it precisely in that period, the 162nd BCE, with a margin of error of only 30 years. This meant the fragment might have been written during the author's own lifetime, not a copy made generations later. A potential original. The implications were profound. If the fragment was indeed contemporary with the book's composition, it represented the closest possible link to the original text. Any variations between this fragment and later manuscripts would reveal how the text had been modified over time. Scholars could potentially reconstruct the Book of Daniel as it existed before centuries of copying introduced changes. For believers who regard Daniel as genuine prophecy written centuries before the events it describes, the dating was challenging. The AI confirmed what secular scholars had long argued. The book was written when they said it was written, not in the 6th century BCE as tradition claimed. The Ecclesiastes fragment proved even more controversial. The Book of Ecclesiastes, attributed in Jewish tradition to King Solomon, is one of the most philosophically sophisticated texts in the Hebrew Bible. Its skeptical reflections on the meaning of life have puzzled and inspired readers for millennia. Modern scholars had dated its composition to the 3rd century BCE, based on linguistic analysis. The Greek philosophical influences in the text seem to require a Hellenistic context. Enoch dated the fragment to approximately 240 BCE, consistent with scholarly consensus but far removed from Solomon's era in the 10th century BCE. For critical scholars, this was confirmation of what they already believed. For traditional believers, it raised difficult questions. If the AI's dating was correct, and if the fragment showed no signs of being copied from an earlier source, then the book was not written by Solomon. The traditional attribution was a literary convention, not historical fact. Similar findings emerged from other biblical fragments. Variations between the Dead Sea texts and the later Masoretic text, which became the standard Hebrew Bible, suggested that the biblical text was more fluid in antiquity than later tradition acknowledged. Different communities apparently preserved different versions. Passages present in one version were absent in another. The response from religious institutions was mixed. Some scholars embraced the findings as evidence that the biblical text had been carefully preserved across millennia, with variations proving minor rather than substantial. Others worried that publicizing the variations would undermine faith. A few demanded that the AI's methodology be independently verified before any more findings were announced. The Catholic Church, which had been embarrassed decades earlier by the slow publication of the scrolls, remained officially silent. Protestant denominations varied in their responses. Jewish authorities debated whether the findings had implications for halakha, religious law, given that legal interpretations sometimes depended on specific textual readings. The war over ancient truth. The moment these findings went public, the war began. And make no mistake, it is a war. In 2023, when the University of Groningen published Enoch's dating results in the journal PLOS One, the response was immediate and fierce. Within weeks, a group of senior paleographers published a scathing rebuttal, accusing the AI researchers of oversimplifying centuries of scholarly expertise into algorithms. Professor Emmanuel Tove, one of the world's foremost Dead Sea Scrolls experts who spent decades as editor-in-chief of the official publication project.
But I'm very happy to be joined by Professor Emmanuel Tove, who is Professor Emeritus at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has been awarded the Israel Prize in Biblical Studies.
Expressed deep reservations about trusting machines with texts that required human judgment and cultural understanding. The battle lines were drawn between those who saw AI as a revolutionary tool and those who saw it as a threat to everything they had built their careers upon. The conflict turned personal fast. At the 2023 International Meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature in San Antonio, a panel discussion on AI and ancient manuscripts devolved into shouting. One prominent scholar allegedly told an AI researcher that machines would never understand what scribes felt when they copied sacred texts. The researcher reportedly responded that feelings were irrelevant when the handwriting data was clear. Colleagues who had collaborated for years stopped speaking to each other. Academic Twitter became a battlefield of accusations and counter-accusations. Some researchers received hate mail from religious believers who felt their faith was under attack. Others received threats from conspiracy theorists who believed they were suppressing evidence of ancient aliens or hidden gospels. But this war did not start in 2023. It has been simmering for decades. Back in 1991, when the Huntington Library in California released unauthorized photographs of the scrolls to break the academic monopoly, the original publication team was furious. John Strugnell, who had led the team, gave an interview to an Israeli newspaper in which he made inflammatory remarks about Judaism, calling it a horrible religion that should have disappeared. The scandal ended his career and exposed the toxic politics that had surrounded the scrolls from the beginning. Father Roland DeVoe, Strugnell's predecessor, had been accused of deliberately slowing publication to prevent findings that might challenge Catholic doctrine. Whether true or not, the accusation poisoned relationships between Jewish and Christian scholars for a generation. The institutional response to AI findings has been equally divided and equally bitter. The Israel Antiquities Authority, which controls physical access to the scrolls stored in the Shrine of the Book Museum in Jerusalem, announced in early 2024 that all AI analysis would require special approval and oversight. Critics called this censorship disguised as quality control. Supporters argued that the scrolls were too precious and too controversial to be subjected to untested methodologies that could produce misleading results. The Vatican's response has been particularly interesting to watch. The Pontifical Biblical Institute, still haunted by decades-old accusations that Catholic scholars suppressed scroll publications, has maintained careful public silence while privately funding its own AI research initiatives. Vatican scholars are closely monitoring Enoch's findings, preparing responses to any discoveries that might challenge traditional church teachings about biblical authorship or the origins of Christianity. The financial stakes have made everything worse. The Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., a $500 million facility funded by the evangelical Green family who owns Hobby Lobby, had spent millions acquiring Dead Sea Scroll fragments to display as proof of biblical authenticity. In 2018, German researcher Kip Davis and a team of scientists used multispectral imaging and forensic analysis to prove that all 16 of the museum's fragments were modern forgeries. The forgers had used ancient parchment, probably scraped clean of original text, and written fake Hebrew script using ink designed to look ancient. Some fragments had been artificially aged using animal glue and sediment. The scandal was devastating, but the forgery crisis extended far beyond one museum. Scholars now estimate that as many as 70 fake Dead Sea Scroll fragments entered the antiquities market after 2002. Collectors paid between $100,000 and $1 million per fragment, eager to own pieces of biblical history. Universities, including Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, Azusa Pacific University, and Trinity International University, had purchased fragments for their collections. All of them were fake. The scandal raised existential questions about the entire field. If experts could be fooled by forgeries for over a decade, how reliable was any of their scholarship? And if AI could detect forgeries with unprecedented accuracy, what would happen to the lucrative antiquities trade? The answer became clear quickly. Dealers who had sold fragments for hundreds of thousands of dollars suddenly faced the possibility that their merchandise would be exposed as worthless fakes. Some welcomed the transparency, arguing that AI authentication would restore trust in the market. Others began lobbying against AI analysis, arguing that owners had a right to privacy and that forced analysis would destroy the value of legitimate artifacts. The debate reached Capitol Hill when a Republican congressman from Texas introduced a bill that would have restricted federal funding for AI analysis of religious artifacts. The bill died in committee, but the message was clear. This was no longer just an academic dispute. It was a political war with millions of dollars and powerful interests at stake. Meanwhile, the fragments keep revealing secrets that nobody can control. In 2024, researchers announced that AI analysis had identified previously unknown connections between Dead Sea texts and the New Testament, specifically between the Community Rule Scroll and passages in the Gospel of Matthew. The findings suggested that early Christian writers may have had direct access to Qumran materials. Professor John Collins of Yale Divinity School called the discovery potentially revolutionary for understanding Christian origins. Conservative Christian scholars pushed back fiercely, arguing that the connections were coincidental, or that the AI was finding patterns that did not reflect genuine historical influence. The deeper issue extends far beyond ancient scrolls. Artificial intelligence represents a fundamental shift in how knowledge is produced and validated. For centuries, expertise meant human expertise. Scholars spent decades learning languages, studying manuscripts, developing intuitions that could not be reduced to rules. Now machines can process more data in an hour than a human could analyze in a lifetime. They find patterns invisible to human perception, but they cannot explain their reasoning in ways that humans fully understand. When an AI says a scroll was written in 165 BCE, it cannot articulate why in terms that a traditional paleographer would recognize. This creates a crisis of authority that goes beyond the scrolls themselves. Should we trust the machine or the scholar, the algorithm or the intuition? There is no neutral ground. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered by accident 77 years ago and fought over ever since, have become the testing ground for questions that will define the future of knowledge itself. And the outcome of this war will determine not just what we believe about ancient texts, but how we believe anything at all in an age when machines see more than human eyes ever could. The Dead Sea Scrolls have lain in silence for 2,000 years, their secrets entrusted to the desert, preserved by time and hidden from human hands. Now, under the scrutiny of artificial intelligence, fragments that once defied comprehension are beginning to speak. Patterns emerge, codes are revealed, dates are confirmed, Words long forgotten are coming back to life, and with them, questions humanity has never been forced to face. The ancient scribes did their part. They wrote, they hid, they trusted that the future would be worthy of their sacrifice. The future is here. The scrolls are speaking, and the discoveries are only just beginning. What truths have been buried for millennia, and what happens when the past finally refuses to remain silent? The story is far from over, and the answers may change everything we thought we knew about history, faith, and ourselves.